On my granddaughter's christening, my son stood up in front of 40 people and told me my restaurant was an embarrassment he'd been covering for since he was 17. My daughter-in-law filmed it on her phone like she'd been waiting for this moment for years. Neither of them knew what I'd already done 3 days before I even walked into that church. My name is Walter Hensley, and before I tell you what happened that afternoon, I want to ask you something. Tell me where you're watching this from tonight. Drop it down in the comments. And if you're new around here, go ahead and hit subscribe, because you're going to want to see how this one lands. I need to tell you about my wife first, because none of what I did afterward makes any sense without her. Rosalind Hensley ran the front of house at Hensley's Diner on Route 9 in Belhaven, Pennsylvania, for 38 years, and she had a rule she never once broke, not even the year we almost lost the building to back taxes. Anybody who came in and sat at the counter got a coffee refill before they asked for it. She said watching the cup made people feel like they were waiting on us instead of the other way around, and nobody should ever feel like they're waiting on a meal they're paying for. She knew the name of every trucker who came through on the Tuesday run, knew which ones had kids in college and which ones were sending money home to mothers overseas, and she kept a little spiral notebook behind the register with birthdays written in pencil so she could slide a free slice of pie across the counter on the right day without anybody asking her to. When Milo Sanders, one of our dishwashers, got laid off in the middle of a February he couldn't afford, and I mean laid off from his other job, not ours, Rosalind found out he was skipping lunch so his kids could eat dinner, and she started plating him a to-go container every single shift without ever mentioning it, just left it by the time clock like it belonged to him already. I only found out because his wife wrote us a card that Christmas. Rosalind passed 14 months ago. It was her heart, sudden, on a Wednesday morning while she was still in her robe, reading the paper at our kitchen table. I'm telling you all this because you need to understand what kind of place my son thought he had the right to call an embarrassment. I'm 63. I've run Hensley's Diner since I was 25, and my father ran it for 22 years before that, back when the counter stools were red vinyl and the jukebox actually worked. Same griddle my father bought, used in 1979, still going, because a good flat top doesn't care what year it is if you take care of it. I'm not a complicated man. I open at 6. I close the books myself every night, and for most of my adult life I believed that if you worked hard and stayed honest, your children would be proud of where they came from. I found out 4 years ago that isn't automatically true. My son's name is Marcus. He went to college on money Rosalind and I saved by not taking a single vacation for 9 straight years, got a marketing job at a firm 2 hours away in Harrisburg, and married a woman named Callie who I liked fine at first, before I understood what liking her was going to cost me. The first time Marcus called the diner that grease trap I grew up embarrassed of was at his own wedding rehearsal dinner, which we paid for, and he said it laughing, like it was just a joke between him and his college friends who'd never once set foot in Belhaven. I laughed along with him. Rosalind had just gotten her diagnosis 3 weeks earlier, and I remember thinking I didn't have the strength that month to make anything smaller or harder than it already was. After that, it just kept being easier to let it go than to say something. I want to be honest about that part, because I don't come out of this story looking like a man who stood up for himself the first time it mattered. I didn't. It took me 4 years and a christening to finally do it. My granddaughter's name is Ivy. She's Marcus and Callie's first child, and her christening was scheduled for the second Sunday in June at St. Bartholomew's, the same church where Rosalind and I got married 40 years ago, the same church where we held her funeral 14 months before this one. The reception afterward was at Callie's parents' house on Larchmont Drive, a house with a circular driveway and a caterer, which was Marcus and Callie's way, and I understood that, and I didn't begrudge it. What I didn't expect was for Marcus to bring up the diner at all, not that day. Sunday, June 7th, roughly 2 in the afternoon. 40-some people standing around with little plates of finger food, Ivy asleep in her christening gown in Callie's arms, and Marcus pulled me aside by the drink table, except he didn't pull me aside quiet. He said it loud enough that his Uncle Pete stopped chewing and his cousin Deb actually turned around with her phone still in her hand from taking pictures of the baby. "Dad, we need to talk about the diner situation before it gets worse." That's how he opened it, at his own daughter's christening, with cake still on the table. I told him this wasn't the place. He kept going anyway, said Belhaven's changing. Said the new shopping plaza going in off the highway was going to finish off what was left of downtown. Said Rosalind's not here to keep pretending the numbers work. So it's really just the two of us who have to be honest about it now. The room went the kind of quiet where everybody heard it, and nobody wanted to be the one who reacted first. Callie's mother set down her wine glass slow, like the sound of it might make things worse. I said his name, and I said it wasn't his place to decide when his mother got to be part of a conversation, alive or 14 months gone. I said it even. I didn't raise my voice, and looking back, I think that evenness might have unsettled him more than shouting would have. Marcus didn't apologize. He looked almost satisfied, the way a man looks when he's finally said something he's been rehearsing for years, and it came out exactly the way he practiced it. Everybody's a little sensitive today, he said. Not to me, to the room, like I was the one who'd made it strange. That's when Callie stepped in, and she didn't ease into it the way Marcus had. She said my name once, sharp, phone already coming up out of her clutch bag like she'd had it ready. Walter. You need to apologize to Marcus right now for embarrassing him in front of his own daughter's christening, or you don't get to be Ivy's grandfather. We'll figure out visitation some other way. I watched the little red light on her phone. She was recording me. Marcus didn't stop her. He just stood there with that same satisfied look, waiting to see what I'd do with an audience. I looked at my son. I looked at the woman holding my granddaughter, filming the moment she thought was going to be the one where I finally got put in my place after 40 years of being the man who smelled like bacon grease and small-town nothing. And I said 5 words. Then I'm no longer his. I set my plate down on the drink table, not hard, just set it down, the way Rosalind used to set a check down when a table had gotten ugly and there wasn't going to be a tip worth arguing about. I picked my jacket up off the back of a folding chair, the navy one Rosalind bought me for our 35th anniversary, and I walked out through the side gate into a June afternoon that felt like it had a temperature and nothing else in it. No smell, no weight, just warm air that didn't mean anything. A lawnmower 2 yards down kept running the whole time, like the world hadn't noticed. I got into my truck, an '09 Silverado with 140,000 miles on it, and I sat there a minute before I turned the key, because my hands needed a minute to stop being somebody else's hands. If you've ever had a moment where the people who were supposed to be proudest of you made you feel like the outsider standing at your own family's table, I want you to know you're not the only one sitting with that tonight. Go ahead and hit that like button if this is landing somewhere real for you. We're just getting started. Because Marcus and Callie had no idea what I'd already done 3 days before that christening, and they were about to find out the hard way. I have to back up a little, because there's a piece of this you need before I tell you what happened next. Her name is Renata Ochoa. She was the home health aide who sat with Rosalind 4 nights a week in the last 2 months, back when the hospice nurses could only come every other day and somebody needed to be there overnight. Renata kept showing up long after her contract with the agency ended. Every Wednesday since the funeral, she stops by my house around 7 with a container of something. Arroz con pollo most weeks. Sometimes just a thermos of coffee, because she says, I look like a man who needs the company more than the food. She never asks me for anything. She just shows up, sits at my kitchen table for 40 minutes, and lets me talk about Rosalind if I want to, or not, if I don't. I hadn't really looked straight at what that meant until I was driving home from Larchmont Drive with my jaw still tight, and it hit me that Renata Ochoa had shown up for my family more consistently in 14 months than my own son had in the last 4 years. There was something else I'd noticed and hadn't wanted to look at directly. Marcus used to call me on Sunday mornings, just to talk, ever since he left for college. A habit that started with Rosalind making him promise before he drove off with his dorm boxes in the back seat. Sometime around 2 years ago, those calls started getting shorter, and then Callie's voice started showing up in the background, prompting him, redirecting whatever he'd actually called to say. I told myself he was just busy, new baby coming, new house, new pressures. I didn't want to be the father keeping score of his own son's phone calls like a ledger, so I let it sit there, filed under things that were probably nothing. Driving home that Sunday, it stopped being nothing. Here's what you need to understand about the diner situation. Marcus was so eager to force into a conversation at a christening. It wasn't something he'd invented out of thin air. I actually had been planning, for almost a year, to sign the diner's building and half the business over to him. something Rosalind and I had talked about before she got sick. Our way of making sure the place her name was all over stayed in the family, instead of getting sold off to whoever wanted to put a vape shop where the counter used to be. I had an appointment already on the books with my lawyer, a woman named Dolores Feingold, out of an office on Chestnut Street, for the following Monday, June 15th, at 10 in the morning, to finalize the paperwork before Ivy's first birthday, which was going to be the surprise. Thursday, June 4th, 3 days before the christening, I called Dolores and moved the appointment up. I sat in her office with my hat still in my hands and told her I wanted to change what I was signing. I didn't leave Marcus out because I stopped loving him. I left him out, at least the way we'd originally planned it, because a man doesn't get to call his mother's diner a grease trap in front of his college friends, then stand in a church parking lot 4 years later demanding, "I apologize for defending her," and still get to inherit the thing her whole working life was stitched into. No questions asked. The new paperwork set up a trust instead. 60% of the diner's ownership would transfer, over time, into a scholarship fund at Belhaven Community College, established in Rosalind Hensley's name, for students studying hospitality and culinary trades who couldn't otherwise afford the program, the exact kind of leg up she used to give teenagers washing dishes in our kitchen for their first job ever. The remaining 40% stayed with me, with Renata Ochoa named as general manager and given a 10-year path to buy in, the same way I once bought the place in from my father, a little at a time, on trust more than cash. Marcus's name wasn't on a single page. Neither was Callie's. Dolores asked me twice if I was sure, because that's her job, and I told her I hadn't been that sure of anything in 14 months. We signed it Friday morning, June 5th, notarized and filed the same day, 2 days before the christening, before Marcus had said a single word to me about it in person. Now here's the part where the clock Marcus thought he had left kept ticking against him instead of for him. I found out later, in a conversation I'll get to, that Marcus had been quietly telling people at his firm, and even his own mortgage broker, that the diner transfer was as good as finished, that he and Callie were counting on the building as collateral for a bigger house they'd already put an offer on outside Harrisburg. He'd been describing paperwork that didn't exist yet as though it were already signed, weeks before I'd agreed to a single word of it. Sunday evening, the day of the christening. My phone had been quiet since I pulled out of that driveway. Then it wasn't. 3 missed calls by 6 o'clock, 9 by 8. Texts from Marcus that started short and got longer and then went short again. "Dad, call me back." Then whole paragraphs. Then just, "Please, we need to talk." 15 missed calls by 10 that night. A voicemail from Callie, and I want you to hear how different her voice sounded from the woman holding a phone up at me that afternoon. No camera-ready edge to it anymore. Just somebody doing math out loud and not liking the number she kept landing on. 22 missed calls by Monday morning. She had no idea I'd already been to Dolores's office 3 days before she ever picked up her phone to record me. She'd find out soon enough. If this is your first time hearing one of these stories, this is usually the part where things start turning. So go ahead and subscribe now so you don't miss where this one ends up. 29 missed calls by Monday afternoon. I let almost all of them go, not out of spite, but because I genuinely didn't have anything left to say that I hadn't already said with a pen in Dolores Feingold's office 2 days earlier. Tuesday, June 9th, 7:40 in the morning. They were on my porch. Not called ahead, not texted first. Just there. Standing on the same welcome mat Rosalind picked out at a diner supply expo in Pittsburgh back in 2011, a plain thing that just said, "Welcome," in faded rope lettering. Callie's eyes were swollen. Marcus stood half a step behind her, holding Ivy's diaper bag like a prop he didn't know what else to do with, which told me something on its own, because Marcus was never a man who stood half a step behind anybody, not even his own wife. I made coffee. I didn't make a show of it, and I didn't leave them standing on the porch either. Whatever else was true, I was still that baby's grandfather, and Marcus was still my son, and some part of me hadn't stopped being his father just because I'd said 5 words in a driveway 3 days earlier. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one Rosalind used to sit at with her spiral notebook of birthdays, and Marcus asked me straight out what I'd done. I told him plainly. The diner, the trust, his mother's name on the scholarship fund, Renata as manager, with a path to buy in. I kept my voice level, the same tone I'd use ordering breakfast, and that seemed to rattle him more than if I'd raised it, because there was nothing left in the room for him to push back against. He was the one who came apart first, not Callie. He said this wasn't legal. Said I couldn't just change my mind on him after all these years. Said he'd already told people at his firm it was settled. Told his mortgage broker the collateral was as good as in hand. I told him I understood that was a real problem for him now, and that it wasn't a problem I'd created. It was one he'd built for himself by counting money that was never his to count. "You're doing this over one comment at a christening," he said, and I told him, "I'm doing this because of 4 years of comments, Marcus, and because you brought your mother into it like she was a line item on a spreadsheet at your own daughter's christening. That's the whole reason. You don't need to go looking for a second one." Callie didn't say much this time. She sat there with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug she never drank from, and she asked me, quiet, if there was any way to undo it. I told her the trust was filed, notarized, done, but I don't think that was really her question, and I think we both knew it. Her real question was whether there was any way to undo that Sunday afternoon, the phone, the 5 words, all of it. I told her I loved my son and I loved my granddaughter, and that hadn't changed and wasn't going to. But I told her I wasn't apologizing for defending Rosalind's memory at Rosalind's own granddaughter's christening, and that if Marcus ever wanted to sit at my table again without somebody's phone already recording before I'd even said a word, he knew exactly where I lived, same as he always had. Marcus left first, out the front door without finishing his coffee. Callie stayed another 20 minutes, and for the first time in longer than I want to admit, it was just the two of us talking, with Ivy asleep in her car seat by the door, no third voice correcting the reason anybody had come. I'm not going to sit here and tell you Marcus and Callie lost the house outside Harrisburg, because I honestly don't know that for certain, and I'm not interested in keeping score on another man's mortgage like it's a scoreboard I get to update. What I can tell you is that Renata Ochoa took over as general manager of Hensley's Diner 2 weeks later, and the first thing she did was start a new notebook behind the register, same as Rosalind's old one, birthdays written in pencil, because she said a place like ours shouldn't lose that just because the woman who started it isn't standing at the register anymore. I still get my Wednesday visit at 7 o'clock. Some weeks now, Marcus calls on a Sunday morning, on his own, no other voice prompting him in the background. And last month he brought Ivy by the diner on a Saturday, sat her in a high chair at the counter, and let her bang a spoon against the same countertop his grandfather bought, used in 1979. I don't know if things with Callie ever fully thaw, and I've mostly stopped needing them to on any particular schedule. I'm not waiting on an apology to feel settled about what I did in that lawyer's office 3 days before a christening. I already feel settled. That part surprised me more than anything else in this whole story, how quiet it gets on the other side of not needing something from somebody anymore. If there's one thing I hope you carry out of this tonight, it's that you don't have to earn a seat at your own family's table by staying quiet when it matters most, even when the room is full of people and somebody's got a camera up. Loyalty that only ever runs in one direction isn't loyalty. It's just an arrangement somebody expects you to keep renewing for free, and you're allowed to stop. If this story meant something to you, go ahead and hit subscribe. Tell me down in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and tell me if you've ever had to walk out of your own family's celebration to remember exactly who you were before you sat down at that table. I read every single one of them. I'll see you in the next one.